Welcome to our class on Chassidus. This week we're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe based on the verse in this week's Torah portion, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, ve'amarta aleim, should tell them that they should make tzitzis for their four-cornered garments. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parsha Shlach, which was that year, the 28th day of the month of Sion, which was Mevorchim HaChodesh, where you bless the month of Tamuz, just like this year, we're blessing the month of Tamuz, and it was in the year of Tafshin Lamed Beis, exactly 49 years ago. So again, the opening of the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, v'amarta aleim, you should tell them, and what should you tell them? V'yaslam tzitzis, they should make tzitzis. So the Rebbe asks a simple question. Why does it say daber, to speak, and then again v'amarta? One is enough, either daber or v'amarta. So the Rebbe brings from the Rabbeinu Bechaya a classic commentary in the Chumash that says that daber is the klal, telling you the general idea of the mitzvah, and v'amarta aleim is telling you the specifics, all the details of the mitzvah. And the Rebbe brings some different places of mysticism, and they ask a simple question. What are we saying? Daber is a general component of the mitzvah, and amarta is the specific details. So why is daber connected to the general and amira to the specifics? Maybe amira is a general and daber is specifics. What's the relationship with daber to the general idea and amira to the specifics? So Rebbe explains and he says, because daber is an expression of speaking strong. And Rebbe gives an example. When the brothers went back to Yaakov to tell him about their interaction in Egypt, so the verse says clearly, they said, Diber ha'ish adoni ha'aret, you see the word Diber, and he spoke to us, the verse says kashay, strongly. So you see when there's a word Diber, it's an association with a strong type of speech. On the other hand, Amira is warmth, refined, soft. Where do we see that? That when when he had the angels came to him and they were trying to break down the door of the house, so he went out and he said, "Vayomer alna achai tereu." He speaks to his community and he calls them brothers. And who do you call a brother? Someone that you're friendly with. And over there they use the expression of vayomer. So you see clearly that daber is associated with a strong type of speech, and vayomer is more of a soft type of speech. Now. So once we know that daber is strong and amira is soft, and the Rebbe explains like this. So when it comes to the klal, when you talk about something in general, what does it mean you're talking about something in general? You're not telling the details. Where's all the details? It's concealed. In other words, so when you're telling someone general ideas, that's strong talk. Give me details, understanding, comprehension, explain it to me. That's soft. So when you say that daber, and daber we know is strong, that's associated with giving the general guidelines, which means basically it's above being enclosed into the relationship. It's not making it personalized. When you just give someone commands and you tell them general terms, that's the idea of kasha, heart. On the other hand, when you say details, when you explain things, that's associated with amira, which is basically soft. And that's basically because you're enclosing into the person. You should understand it, it's revealed, it's explainable, etc. So in other words, when it comes to the dibur, so it's harsh, it's general. When it comes to amira, it's soft, and it has all the details. And Rebbe explains. Because what happens is like this. When you have a mitzvah, so there's the global mitzvah, you have to do this, but then there's the details of the mitzvah. What the details of the mitzvah? The details of a mitzvah is that when you understand it on all three levels of the garments. Which three levels? Machshava, thought, speech, and action. In other words, when you go ahead to do a mitzvah, and you stop, and first you use your machshava, your thought. What does that mean? Think of what's the purpose of the mitzvah? What is the spiritual idea of the mitzvah? And you meditate on the mitzvah, now you're personalizing it in your thought. What is the dibur of a mitzvah? So before you do the mitzvah, you stop, and you realize it's a commandment from Hashem. You make a blessing with your mouth, so you're drawing down the energy of the mitzvah into the speech by saying the blessing on it. And then you have the action of doing the mitzvah, which is the body of the mitzvah. So you see that every mitzvah the more you go down and internalize it in thought, meditation, speech, verbal, and action, that's the details of a mitzvah. And we know when you do a mitzvah, machshava dibur ma'isa, it's much more enjoyable, it's much more meaningful. You can relate to it much better. It creates a certain deeper relationship with Hashem. However, so that's the details of a mitzvah. What is the general idea of a mitzvah? The general mitzvah idea is Hashem commanded us, and by doing the command of Hashem, we connect to Hashem. We know the word mitzvah is the expression of tzafsa v'chibur. It's a command that creates a connection. Like, for example, we say when we make a blessing by a mitzvah, we say, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvaysav, you sanctified us with the commandments, v'tzivanu, when you commanded us. What does it mean? What does it mean you commanded us? So when you hear that the reason why you're doing the mitzvah, because Hashem commanded us. What is that called? In Kabbalah, it's called Kabbalah Soil. You're accepting. Hashem commanded, Hineni, I'm ready to do it. And obviously, once I accept, and you accept Hashem's commandments, and by doing the commandment, you're connecting literally with the Atzmos Oirein Seif Baruch Hu, with the essence of the infinite of light. So, in other words, what happens to me? I don't exist. I totally become humbled to the fact that it's a commandment from Hashem, and I'm ready to do it. Up to the point that the Rebbe explains, like the Alter Rebbe writes in the Kut Torah, that let's say, for example, Hashem commanded us to chop wood, to stand all day and chop wood, or for an hour a day, 2 hours a day, and that would be a mitzvah. And even though it doesn't make sense, and there's no effect of chopping the wood stays there. Guess what? We do it. Why? Because Hashem commanded us. Now, so that component of the mitzvah, that we're just doing it because Hashem said, Kabbalah soil, that means I would even just chop wood if that's the commandment of Hashem. So that's the general idea of a mitzvah, which is basically, it's harsh, it's cold. Which basically, practically, what does that mean? Kabbalah soil, I'm accepting. Not accepting for a reason. I'm accepting beyond logic. Hashem commanded me, I'm ready to do it. However, when it comes to the details of the mitzvah, like we mentioned before, machshava, you meditate on the reason for the mitzvah, and you make a blessing, and you actually do the physical mitzvah. So that's something we can relate to. That's meaningful. That's enjoyable. And that's why the details is associated with raka, where it's softness. Now, so again, to be clear, there's two components to every mitzvah. There's the component of the mitzvah is we have to do it because Hashem commanded us. That's the general mitzvah. And every mitzvah has the general idea Hashem commanded us. Why are we doing it? Kabbalah says I'm ready to accept. But what type of relationship does that create between us and Hashem? It's kasha, it's hard. Because I'm just accepting. I don't know the reason for it. It's okay, I'm still happy to do it. But on the other hand, you have the component of the mitzvah where you can meditate on it with your thought, you make the blessing, so you personalize it, you do the physical mitzvah. Two different components of the mitzvah. So there's a component which is kasha, which is hard, which is associated with daber, which we said daber is associated with harshness. And then there's the component of the mitzvah, which is associated with amira, which is soft, the reasons, the details, the part that we meditate, the part that we connect to. Now, so that's on a practical level. We all know that everything is connected to the sfirot, the 10 sfirot. So the sphira, when it talks about the spheres, in the spheres, so the mitzvah is connected to the sphirot. So daber, which we said is harsh, which is the idea where you're accepting upon yourself the yoke of Hashem. Which sphira is that connected to? It's actually connected to a very high sphira. It's connected to which one? Keser. In Keser we know there's Tainug, the highest part, and Ratzon, the lower part. So the idea that we're just doing Kabbalah soil, it's actually connected to a higher sphere. It's connected to the sphere of Keser and Ratzon Hashem, which means Hineni, Ratzon Hashem, I'm ready to do it. So even though it's not as enjoyable, but you're connected much higher. So it's interesting. In other words, the deeper of the mitzvah, the harsh part of the mitzvah, where it's Kabbalah soil, maybe it's not personalized, it's not warm. But when you do it from that perspective, you connect to a higher sphere. You connect to the sphere of Kesed, you connect to the sphere of Ratzon. In other words, so from Ratzon, this is what Hashem wants. This is the will of Hashem. So when you're doing the mitzvah, it doesn't make a difference, this mitzvah, that mitzvah. There really isn't a difference between any one of the 613 commandments. If it's about doing Ratzon Hashem, Whatever Ratzon Hashem is, I'll do. Whether it's the positive commandment, the negative commandment, it's irrelevant what the mitzvah is. It's the same feeling. I'm doing Ratzon Hashem. Or like, for example, like Dr. Rebbe said before, that even if Hashem asks us to just chop wood with Ratzon Hashem, there really is no difference. But from that perspective, you're reaching a very, very high sphera. And not only that, the Rebbe says a step further. What happens if you have to do a mitzvah? And there's multiple components to a mitzvah. And you did, let's say, 9 out of 10. Did you fulfill Hashem's will? Absolutely not. Because Hashem's will is, let's say, for example, one mitzvah has 10 details. And you did 9 out of 10. You didn't do Ratzon Hashem. You did your will. You were close, but it wasn't Ratzon Hashem. So you see, when it comes to Ratzon, when it comes to Kabbalah soil, it's either all or nothing. Now, when it's all, you hit a home run. You hit Kasser. You hit Ratzon Hashem. It's amazing. It's kosher 100%. So there's pros and cons with it. On the other hand, when it comes to the idea of the details of the mitzvah, emoir, all the details, the meditation, the verbal, and the action, what's the source in Sfirot for the details of the mitzvah? So it doesn't hit that high. It only reached the level of Chachma. The details, the reason of the mitzvah is Chachma. And we all know that when it comes to Chachma and Bina, from a Chachma and Bina perspective, logical perspective, you're even able to do part of a mitzvah. So let's say a mitzvah has 10 components, and you did even 5. So from Chachma and Bina's perspective, intellect, guess what? You got a 50. You didn't fail. If someone went ahead and did 50%, you got a 50. You did 70%, you got a 70. You did 20, you got a 20. But when it comes to Ratzon, it's either pass or fail. You either did it or you didn't do it. So again, to recap, before we go further. So what the Rebbe is saying is like this. There's 2 components in every mitzvah. There's the component where it's Ratzon Hashem, the will of Hashem, and that inspires us, Kabbalah soil, I'm ready to accept. And if you accept and you do it all, so you got it. And where do you reach? You reach the level of Ratzon. On the other hand, the details of the mitzvah, whatever you do is great. And as much as you accomplish, that's percent of the mitzvah you accomplished. But on the other hand, how far are you going to reach in the level of Sfirot? You're going to reach the level of Chachma. Because in Chachma, you can go 50% and it's also fine. So that's why Ratzon, when you're doing the will of the mitzvah, the general mitzvah, it's kosher, because it's not personalized, it's not warm. On the other hand, the details of the mitzvah, it's enjoyable, because whatever I do. You can get a mark. Whatever you do, you're still going to pass. You'll still get points for it. So obviously that's the idea of the warmth of the mitzvah. So Rebbe asked a very, very simple question. This idea of the general ideas of the mitzvahs and the specific of the mitzvah in the details, and the way it connects to the spheres, Ratzon and Chachma, enjoyable or not enjoyable, why is that specifically in reference to the mitzvah of tzitzis? Seemingly, these 2 ideas of the general idea and the details, which practically means Kabbalah soil, willing to accept the yoke, or the details of the mitzvah, which is connected to Ratzon and to Chachma, that applies to all the mitzvahs. For example, the Rebbe gives an example. Let's take the mitzvah of tefillin. So you have the physical action of the mitzvah of putting on tefillin, but you also you're willing to basically put your heart and mind aside. You're willing to connect to Hashem, which is the level of Kabbalah soil. So again, so in tefillin you have the physical component, you have the meditation, saying the blessing, and the physical component of the mitzvah, but then you're accepting whatever Hashem wants. You're willing even to put your heart and mind dedicated to Hashem. And we know that the whole Torah is compared to tefillin. So if you have it by tefillin, you have it by all the mitzvahs of the Torah. And there is a step further. The fact is, all the mitzvahs, the source of every mitzvah has its source in Chachma, which is the details of the mitzvah, and all the mitzvahs have its source in Kesser. So if that's the case, so this Daber and Amira, which Daber represents the Kabbalah soil, and represents the general idea of the mitzvah, and Amira represents the specific of the mitzvah, and one is Ratzon and one is Chachma. So why does it say specifically by tzitzis? If it's, in theory, it applies to all the mitzvahs. So the Rebbe explains, and he says something very powerful, and he says as follows. Because in the mitzvah of tzitzis, besides the fact that it's like all the other mitzvahs, but when you look at the physical component of the mitzvah of tzitzis, it's literally spelled out and it's laid out in a revealed way. These 2 components. In other words, that in the beginning you have the idea, the way mitzvah of tzitzis is in general, and it's the will of Hashem connected to Ratzain, and then you see the way the mitzvah of tzitzis goes out into the detail and into the level of Chachma. So where do we see that? The Rebbe explains like this, and he says as follows. So when it comes to the physical component of the mitzvah of tzitzis, so we all know there's the talis, there's the garment, whether it's the talit katan that people wear underneath their shirt, some people wear on top of their shirt, or it's the talit gadol. So there's two components to the talis. You have the four-cornered garment, and then you have the strings that are in each one of the four corners. Two physical components. That's the structure of a talis. The garment, and then you have the four corners where the strings come out. So what is that? Now, technically, it looks like a garment and strings, but we know it's not so. On a spiritual level, what does the garment represent, and what does the strings represent? So Rebbe explains like this. The talis, the garment part, is called in the Zohar Prisu de Malka. What does Prisu de Malka mean? It's the garment of the king. What does that mean? It's the garment of the king. What does a garment mean? A garment you don't internalize. It covers you from the outside. In Hebrew, it's a lavush. It's a garment. In Kabbalah, it's makif. It encloses you from without and encloses you totally. So the talis represents the idea of a lavush, where it's a garment that clothes you from the outside, covers you from the outside, and it makif. It covers over you all from the outside. In other words, practically speaking, you look at the talis and you put on a big talis. So what do? It wraps you around your whole body. It's supposed to be matter of fact, there's actually specific requirements to have a proper size of a talis so that it actually covers most of your body. Which basically means all the details of your body should be totally covered. And should be covered equal. So in other words, the talis, just like physically it covers you, and when you see someone wrapped in a talis, you don't see anything. You don't see someone wrapped in a talis. So the same idea is the talis represents spiritually, it's not about details. It's all about the global idea. So again, let's take a moment before we wrap it up. So what do you see? No pun intended, wrapping it up, right? When you take a talis and you wrapped up, so you don't see any more the head, you don't see the hands, you don't see the body, you don't see someone wrapped up in a sheet. You can't differentiate the details. So in other words, the talis physically represents that it covers, and it's all one, it's all equal, and that represents spiritually in terms of the mitzvah, where it's what? Ratzain Hashem. So the talis represents it's all equal, which means every mitzvah and every detail of the mitzvah, it's one thing. Master key. It's Ratzain Hashem and the will of Hashem. So you literally see the first component in the talis. The talis represents Ratzain Hashem, the will of Hashem. And that's why we know that the talis, the first component, when you're doing Ratzain Hashem, is connected to its sphere, the sphere of Ratzain, which is in Kesser. Now, let's look at the strings. When you look at the strings from a talis, so now you have a lot of details. You have the knots, you have the strings, and you have multiple strings, a lot of details. And the Rebbe actually quotes from a verse that says, "Vayikacheni b'tzitzis roshi," that he grabbed me by the strings of my head. So you see that already strings is details. And through the strings you can already separate, you can grab things, etc. Also, the Rebbe says, not only is it something which has details that you're able to grab, because a makif you can't grab. How do you grab a makif? Something that happens to you can't grab it, it's one big sheet. Versus once you have strings, then you can hold on to it. So there's details. The second component of tzitzis is, besides the fact that it has details, also the tzitzis is all about, the idea comes from the expression of re'iyah, to see. Why do we know we say that? What's the connection with seeing? So it says in the prophets, Meitzitz minacharakim. He's able to see from the crack. So you see that tzitz, which is the word of tzitzis, is about seeing. Now, what does seeing mean practically? When you look at something, you look and you see details. And when you see all the details, when you look at something which is a beautiful picture, a beautiful painting, so you see the details, then you actually internalize the details, and actually you enjoy the details. And that's how we know that when someone sees something, you become totally connected and one with it. And it really becomes part of you. Like, for example, once someone sees something, which works, unfortunately, for the good and for the bad, it's hard to get it out of your system. And it's hard to deny it once you see it. And that's why it's very, very important to be careful what you watch is holy and godly. Because God forbid you see things which are not holy and godly, that comes inside, and it's hard to take. It's possibly even sometimes even impossible to take out. You can maybe replace it actively. That's another whole discussion for itself. But the point is, back to the point that when you see something, it's internalized with you. And that's the power of seeing over hearing. Like, for example, we know Talmud says you can't compare someone that heard something, someone saw it. Hearing is hearsay. When you saw it, wow, it's real. All the details are alive. What does that mean practically in our spiritual kochot, which means in the sfirot? So the details of the mitzvah, the details, the seeing it, internalizing all the details, that's the level of chachma. So again, you see clearly that the garment of the talit of the talis is referring to the idea of ratzain, the global, and its strings, which is the details, and internalization, that's connected to which sphere, the sphere of chachma. So now we have a clear spiritual image of a talis. A talis represents makif, it represents rotzain, and it represents pnimius, internalization, and it represents the idea of chachma. So now, and here the Rebbe says, spiritually, so what's the essence of the mitzvah of tzitzis? You know that makif, which is extremely powerful, it's connected to rotzain? The goal is that to internalize through the tzitzis, the makif. In other words, like this. The makif is much more powerful. It's connected to Ratzain. It's Ratzain Hashem. The pnimi is not as powerful, it's only connected to Chachma. But it's more enjoyable, it's more meaningful. So what do you want in life? You want everything. We all know we want everything. You want your cake and you want to eat it. So the mitzvah of tzitzis is to teach us and to inspire us, we should go for the highest, we should go for the makif, we should go for Ratzain, but we should internalize it within us, just like the strings internalize, and then we have both. So we want the makif, but we want it internalized. The makif alone is great, but if it's not internalized, it's not enjoyable. On the other hand, the pnimi is the enjoyable, and if you don't go for the makif, you're going to have low-level stuff. So you want to have high-level makif, but you want the high level to be internalized within you. And that's why, even according to Jewish law, that when you make the corner of the garment, so it says clearly in halakha that the corner of the garment has to be even the same material as the garment. Why? Because the goal is we don't want a disconnect between the garment and the corner of the garment. We want the garment, which represents makif, which represents ratzain, should be the same idea as the corner, which represents going into the detail, going into chachma, and they should be totally connected, which means the makif should be able to be internalized. So that's in general. But now there is going to explain what does it mean practically. And as we all know, it's all about serving Hashem. Avodas Adam. We're trying to serve Hashem. So what does it mean practically serving Hashem? So what is makif? Practically. Makif is basically Kabbalah's oil, accepting whatever Hashem wants, l'mayla mitam vadas. I'm willing and ready to do whatever Hashem wants without questioning, understanding. I'm ready. Now, when you say that, you're connecting to literally the most powerful energy, the most powerful light. You want to accept whatever Hashem wants. But the goal is to draw that in and to be personalized in your life. And Rebbe says this is the whole idea of nasa v'nishma. What happened when, and we just learned about this on Shavuot. In other words, nasa, when we said nasa, I'm ready to do, what is that referring to? Nasa. I'm going to do, which means I'm going to do all the mitzvot. Nishma means I want to learn. I want to learn Torah. Now we all know that generally speaking, mitzvos is what level? Kabbalah soil. I am ready to do whatever Hashem tells me to do. And what type of way? Kabbalah soil. I'm willing to accept. Makif. If someone shows up, they want to put on tefillin, they want to keep kosher, they want to keep Shabbos. That's great. What are you connecting to when you do a mitzvah? Hashem. The most powerful place in Hashem, you're connecting Kabbalah soil, makif, you're connecting to the most powerful lights. On the other hand, we got to bring it down to earth. It has to be enjoyable, it has to be appreciative. So then you learn Torah. What happens nishma? You're learning Torah. By learning Torah, you internalize the powerful light. Why? Because we all know that Torah gives us insight into the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs creates the relationship, the deep and powerful relationship, the makiv, the ratzain. But on the other hand, the Torah draws it in and makes it personal. And where do we see that Torah makes it personal? Because it says, "V'Torascha, your Torah, v'soich meyai." The goal of Torah should become internalized, become part of me. So when a person says nasa v'nishma, and specifically nasa first, I'm doing the mitzvahs first, and then I'm going to go ahead and learn Torah, which practically that means I want to draw down nasa, which is Kabbalah soil. I'm willing to accept whatever Hashem says, that this, which is nasa, it should be drawn down into the level of nishma, which means learning Torah, which means it becomes, in a way, a previous and becomes very, very practical. So this is really the whole essence of all the mitzvahs. But we see it clearly by mitzvah of tzitzis, and it applies all over. We want to have the highest level. Ratzon Hashem. How do we do that? Kabbalah soil. The mitzvahs. How do we internalize it? We learn. And then it becomes internalized. So that's the difference between mitzvahs and Torah. But even in mitzvahs you have two components. You have the accepting to do the mitzvah, makif of the mitzvah, and then you have the details of the mitzvah, which internalize. And the Rebbe says, based on this, he explains beautifully the major war that Korach had with Moshe Rabbeinu, which actually comes right after the parasha of Tzitzis. What was the essence of the war between Korach and Moshe Rabbeinu? Korach argued very simple. If you have a talus, which is totally full of tchelas, guess what? You don't need strings. You don't need tzitzis. That was one argument. He had another argument. If you have a house that's full of books, a library full of holy books, you don't need a mezuzah. Why? What was his argument? What do you mean? A house full of books is great. Mezuzah, two separate issues. A talus is a talus and the strings are the strings. Why are you cutting off the strings? Why are you not putting on the mezuzah? Because Korach was arguing that makif is enough. Let's connect to the Ratzon Hashem. I'm doing Ratzon Hashem. It's much more powerful. Which is true, Ratzon is much higher. In other words, I have a talus, I have makif, I have the Ratzon Hashem. I have a house full of books, I have Ratzon Hashem. And therefore there's no reason to draw, and as his argument was, there's no reason to internalize it. If you're connected to Ratzon Hashem, why internalize it? By putting up a mezuzah, by wearing tzitzis. And that's basically what his argument again was against Moshe and Aaron. Now we know that Aaron, what's Aaron all about? Aaron worked in the temple, served Hashem. You couldn't get higher than that. But Aaron was all about taking that powerful energy, that makiv energy, that Ratzon Hashem, and drawing it down. It should be bepnimius. It should be internalized. Like, for example, the famous verse that's brought down many places in mysticism, where it says, "Kan Aaron," the beard of Aaron, sheyoyred al pi midosav, which goes down over on his midosav. So what is it saying? It says, what is the skan Aaron, the beard of Aaron? It's referring to what? The cyrus, the hairs. What does the hair resemble? What does the beard resemble? What does the hair resemble? That it's internalized. Skan Aaron is to take all those high things, but you got to internalize it. It has to be personable. It has to be something you appreciate, something that you understand, something that you meditate on. In other words, that the cyrus of Aaron are just like the tzitzis. The tzitzis are the strings where it becomes internalized. But unfortunately, Korach was from those Levites that basically they totally shaved their beard. In other words, they didn't have the cyrus. They didn't have the idea of internalizing it. And that's basically the essence of the argument in Korach and Aaron. Korach felt, listen, you have the makif, you have the Ratzon Hashem, why internalize it? Aaron said, that's great, that's wonderful, but you got to internalize it. And based on this, Rebbe says something very, very powerful. You give a look at the end of the Parsha of Tzitzis. So what does it say? Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God your God. And then it says again, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God your God. Twice, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, why twice? Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I say twice. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, why twice? And the Rebbe explains very simple. You know why he says it twice? Because we just learned by Tzitzis, Daber, and Vayomer, which is the general and the internal. Makif and Pnimi, Ratzon and Chachma. So Ani Hashem Elokeichem, the first one is for the makif, for the Ratzain, and the second Ani Hashem Elokeichem is for the Pnimius, for the Chachma, the makif, and internalizing it, the Daber and the Amarta. And that's why the Rebbe says, when it's in the mitzvah of Tzitz, it says, Uschartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem. You should remember all the mitzvahs of Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's one. And then it says, V'asisem, you'll do kol mitzvahs, say all my mitzvahs. So first it says, mitzvahs Hashem, and then it says, mitzvahs, say my mitzvahs. What is my mitzvahs? So the Rebbe explains, mitzvahs is referring to mitzvahs, my commandments, which is even higher than mitzvahs Hashem. There's mitzvahs Hashem, where there's mitzvahs of Hashem. But then there's mitzvahs, my commandments, which is much deeper. It's mine. In other words, it's mine, which means it's much deeper than where it's connected to Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, what is that level? That's the level of Kabbalah soil, accepting the yoke, which is higher. But the goal afterwards, it should be drawn down into mitzvahs Hashem. So when it says mitzvah, it's referring to Kabbalah soil, makif, rotzin Hashem. But mitzvahs Hashem is when you bring down the mitzvahs of Hashem into your life, where it becomes a pnimius, and it comes down into the level of chachma. So based on this, Rebbe says something profound. He says like this: when it gives us the commandment about tzitzis, it says, "Daber, speak al bnei Yisrael," to bnei Yisrael. Not every mitzvah that says Daber al bnei Yisrael. Over here, all of a sudden, Daber, speak al bnei Yisrael. Why is it regrouping and saying bnei Yisrael? So the Rebbe says like this, because what is Daber? Daber is makif. Daber is rotzin Hashem. So makif and rotzin Hashem is specifically connected to bnei Yisrael. Why? Because the Jewish people, Yisrael, what are we connected to? And our source. Our source, we're connected to Atzmusa Yemuhusa Yisbarach, to the essence of Hashem. Which we're connected to the essence of Hashem. Which is the level of mitzvah, my commandments, the commandments of Hashem. So that's why it says specifically Daber b'nei Yisrael, because Yisrael are connected to the deepest level. They're connected to mitzvah. And we all know, how do we know the Jewish people are so connected, so deep? Because the fact is that the Jewish people existed before everything, even before the Torah. And because we existed even before the Torah, so because we existed before, therefore we have the power to draw down the most highest level, the Bnei Yisrael, that we existed in mitzvah, into the essence of Hashem, into the Ratzon Hashem. We have the power to draw down the most powerful lights down into the physical world, and down into our physical body, and into every one of our Eser Koyches HaNefesh, every one of our 10 spheres that we have. Up until the point that we're this high spiritual people, and we make literally tzitzis from wool, physical materialistic wool. But guess what? In the wool, we bring in the power of Hashem. How do we do that? And the answer is very simple. Because Yisrael, the Kucha, Brichu, Kulachad. The Jewish people and Hashem, we're one. So if we're one, it's no problem to bring the highest down into the lowest level. Up until the point that we make for Hashem, I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate it, a dira lo yizbarech, a dwelling place for lo yizbarech, for the infinite Hashem, we're betachtoinim. That means we have the power to go ahead and make a dwelling place for the infinite Hashem down into this world. So here you see the powerful insight of every single mitzvah. That we have the power by doing every single mitzvah, just like the mitzvah of tzitzis, to reach the highest, on one hand, Ratzon Hashem, and it's very, very powerful. And it's very meaningful to reach Ratzon Hashem. But it's abstract. But the goal is, through learning Torah and through meditating on each mitzvah, we have the power to draw down the most infinite power of Hashem, bepnimius, internalized. And we connect the Ratzon and the Chachma of Hashem, and this way the mitzvah becomes solid and it becomes complete. So as you see clearly, Hashem wants the best for us. On one hand, He wants us to be able to connect to Him, Makif, Ratzon Hashem, But on the other hand, he wants us to draw down the light into this world. And the fact is, we have the power to do it, because it's not like we are like, so to speak, guests in this world. The truth is that our neshamas are rooted in to the essence of Hashem. And because we're rooted in the essence of Hashem, we have the power to bring Hashem, the most powerful energies, makif, ratzain, down here into this world. Thanks so much for joining us for our beautiful Chassidic discourse. And let's hope our next Chassidic discourse will be in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.